Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar, How to Perform Manual Malware Removal. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Catherine, Emsisoft's Marketing Manager, and with us today is one of our lead malware analysts, and she will be giving us an expert introduction and a live demo of manual malware removal. I'd like to introduce to you guys Elise.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining.
All right, so for today's agenda, we're going to have about a 30 to 45 minute webinar plus a Q&A at the end. We'll cover the following: a brief background on Emsisoft, who we are and what are we talking about malware, an overview of why in this day and age, right, is anyone still talking about manual malware removal, and go in detail on reasons why it may still be necessary. And then on to the meat of the webinar, where we'll go over malware identification, the removal, and the tools that we'll use. And of course, a live technical demo. After the demo, we'll have our Q&A. Throughout the webinar, feel free to submit your questions, and we'll try to answer all of them during the Q&A portion. If you're on a desktop computer, you will see the question box on the right side of the screen. If you're on a cell phone or a tablet, it should be at the bottom below the video. As you may have noticed, there is no audience list or chat box. We take our privacy very seriously here at Emsisoft, so we only have the option to ask questions, and only Elisa and I can see them. So don't be shy to send those questions in. So in the event that we run out of time and or we need more information to be able to accurately answer your questions, we ask that you email us at support@emsisoft.com with a subject line mentioning the webinar. Also, for optimal viewing experience, we recommend using full screen mode. And so with all those notes out of the way, let's get started. Again, we're Emsisoft. Most of you have heard of us, but for those of you who are yet to get to know us, we're a New Zealand-based antivirus and anti-malware company founded in 2003. We're best known for our award-winning Emsisoft anti-malware software program, coupled with our exceptional support team and cybersecurity offerings such as the Emsisoft Emergency Kit. We are first and foremost a customer-centric organization, and we've made it our mission to help individuals and organizations defend against malware. Aside from our security products, one of the ways we help you stay ahead of malware attacks is to host webinars such as these to increase cybersecurity awareness. And so without further ado, I'd like to give the stage to our security expert and one of our Emsisoft's lead malware analysts, Elise. Elise?
Thank you for the introduction. Today we're going to talk about a subject that is not very common for an antivirus or anti-malware company. Usually we stress that prevention is better than cure, and of course that's true, but it's really not helpful to say that when you are in front of an infected computer and you want to fix it. That is the reason we want to discuss manual malware removal today. And I want to add one note here, because I saw some discussion about the purpose of the blog article online. The scope of the article and this webinar is to provide an introduction to manual malware removal. And simply put, that means I have an infected computer in front of me. Security software doesn't help me. It can't be installed or isn't present. And what should I do next? The information about manual malware removal can be applied no matter what security software you prefer. And for that reason, we only will be using freely available tools that are not associated otherwise commercially to Emsisoft. If no antivirus program is present, malware can install itself and make itself comfortable without being bothered by anything. That means it can be more persistent, or it can, for example, block or prevent the installation of an antivirus. And even if it allows the installation, certain components may not be able to start, which can lead to serious stability and security problems. You may experience crashes, for example. Finally, many antivirus programs rely on some sort of behavioral analysis, which means that suspicious activity is detected when malware tries to install on the computer. However, if malware is already present and installed, this form of protection becomes useless. When talking about malware removal, it is very easy to jump over the most important step in malware removal. And that's not the removal part, it's the identification and research part. We can't talk about removal before we know what to remove. And in order to do that, we need to know what to look for and, most importantly, where to look for it. Of course, we could just randomly start looking in folders and at files, but when looking for potential malware, the most logical place to start is Loadpoints. A load point is an object that at some point is launched automatically by Windows. It can be located in the registry or in the file system. Some load points are started when Windows starts, for example, registry run values, but it's also possible for it to be run on a regular interval. For example, a Windows task that has been configured to run every 5 minutes. So why start here? This already sounds pretty complicated. Well, that's true, but in case of malware, you can be sure that it won't rely on you as the computer user to just be kind and double-click its file to run it. So it will need some way of running automatically. And once you start looking at load points, you also need some research skills. How do you determine a file is bad? And how do you determine that information you find on Google is reliable? Googling a file or object with a really generic name doesn't really help. So you need to learn how to successfully combine search terms to find what you need. And after all this, it's time for the actual removal part. This shouldn't be difficult at this point, because if you have made a list during the previous step of identification, you already should know what is candidate for removal. You just have to find a way to remove it without a malware preventing you from doing so. That can be done using a more powerful tool by ensuring Windows won't start a load point. You can think, for example, of using safe mode, or in extreme cases, the Windows recovery environment. And once that is done, it's back to prevention. Because after going through all this, you really want to avoid repeat and probably protect the computer by installing an antivirus and taking some other steps necessary. Of course, technically, you can do malware removal without any special tool, but really, it is a bit time consuming, because you would need to check files, folders, the Windows registry, and all of it manually. Even if you have an idea of where to look, it still would take a lot of time. And for this reason, it's important to pick the right tool for the task. In this demo, we will be using a few Microsoft sysinternals tools, Autoruns and Process Explorer. These tools are freely available for everyone and can be used on all modern Windows versions. There are a lot of other tools that can be used as well, developed either by security companies as well as security enthusiasts. And I really want to underline that none of the tools are important. And this demo is not intended to show how to use Process Explorer or Autoruns or any other tool. It's intended to show you how to pick your tool and approach the problem. Autoruns, which we will be using, is a tool that lists a large number of load points together with useful information about the files or objects that are being loaded. And Process Explorer is a more powerful version of the Windows Task Manager and can be used to check and terminate processes. We will also be using Virustotal, which is an online service that can be used to scan files or URLs by more than 70 different engines, if I'm not mistaken. This can be very useful to get a first impression of a file and to see if it's likely good or bad. Finally, we will be using Regedit to quickly illustrate how Autoruns works and to compare information. This is not necessary for the demo and for removal per se, but it may help you getting a better understanding of how malware can use the registry. And with that, we have come to the part of the demo. Before switching screens, we're looking at a simple infection here. And in reality, things might not always be this straightforward, but the same principles still apply even if you are dealing with more complex malware. I'm now going to bring up the virtual machine. If at this point you haven't enabled full screen mode, it would probably be a good idea to do so, because otherwise it might be hard to follow along what you see on the screen. This is a simple Windows 10 virtual machine using VMware. It's up to date and it has a simple infection running, which we will check out with Autoruns. I'm going to launch Autoruns as an administrator to make sure I have all appropriate permissions. I have adjusted the font size a bit. I hope you all can follow along. I will maximize it. Okay, so as I already told you, Autorun shows you a whole lot of load points. And that's all very nice to know, but if you see this list, it might look as a lot of gibberish and really confusing information. Because in order to know what's bad here, you also need to know what's good. I already gave one example, this first line, in the article. If you haven't read that, you can maybe look it up later if you're interested. So we will just continue. Let's just start at the top. The alternate shell value we have checked out in the article. Then the next items are some run key values. You can see these are located in the local machine branch of the registry. That means such run values will be loaded anytime Windows is started, no matter which user is logged on. And we have 4 objects here. They all look pretty good. The first one is Emsisoft anti-malware. I have that installed on the virtual machine. It's disabled, so it won't interfere with the malware. You can check quickly the file path here. I'm not currently not checking any comments submitted, so if you have questions, I will address them later because that will require me to switch a few times view. Okay, as you can see, this is a legitimate path for Emsisoft's startup entry. You could check the file on Virustotal if you wanted, but it's really not necessary in this case. The second one is from Windows Defender. It also looks legitimate. The third one is from VMware User Process. It's part of the VMware tools which has been installed on this virtual machine. Also a pretty normal path. Then we have another Windows Defender item, also legitimate. And we end up at the 32-bit run values. There's only one of these. This just means there is a 32-bit version of Java running. Its update was running. The program is installed. You could check that by opening the programs and features list and check if it's really installed. But this is legitimate. The path is also legitimate. Then next, we end up at the current user run key. The current user run key is a run key which entries will only be loaded if this particular user is logged in. So if I would create another user profile, this entry would not be there unless I would put it there. And this entry is a bit different than before. As you can see, the run value name here is a string of random letters and numbers. That already makes it a bit suspicious, because you would expect something that's somehow humanly readable in run values. It could be a bit more obscure, but not this obscure. This is just, well, random. And then what you see here in these columns, the description, the publisher, and the image path, the description and publisher are taken from the file metadata. The data can be completed by the developer of the file. And here we see another problem. It says, well, I suspect it's supposed to say Windows Service, except it doesn't say Windows Service, it says Windows Service. That's a typo. Microsoft usually doesn't make that sort of typos in its Windows Service files. And the publisher would never be Windows Service. It would be Microsoft Corporation or something similar. Then let's look at the image path. So the file that's been loaded by this entry. It's located in the temp folder, and it's a file named svhost.exe. If you're familiar with Windows, you will know Windows has a legitimate file named svchost.exe. So I suspect someone wanted to make it look like we're dealing with a legitimate file here, but they failed. We will check this file more in detail a bit later. Let's move on, because we've ended up at the startup folder now. You can see the path here. The startup folder is a folder that may contain files that are launched once Windows is finished starting. And look at that, we see a file that has an identical name to the value we already found before. This file is an executable, a .exe file, which is already very suspicious, because in the startup folder you usually put shortcuts to programs you want to open when Windows starts. For example, you can put a shortcut to your browser there, or a shortcut to your favorite email program, but not an executable, usually something that would belong to a folder. This file has no really interesting metadata listed here, but these two entries are pretty suspicious, so let's look in detail at them. And we will start with this one because it's the simplest one. It doesn't have registry references, it's just one file in one startup folder. To get a bit more information about the file, we could look at its properties, but let's first submit it to Virustotal, because we might get an idea of how malicious it is if it's known. I submitted a hash, and look at it, the detection rate is 47 out of 66. That's not really good for this file. Let's see what we got. As you can see, there's a pretty good detection rate. Also, the file name all of a sudden is game.exe, which also, yeah, that's not legitimate. And there's a big list of infection names here. The names doesn't tell us that much here. Well, they do, but not so much that we can Google the infection name and find information on this particular infection. It will be more generic. So for now, we won't do that because we don't need it. Virustotal kind of confirms this is malicious, as does the file name and the file extension. We wouldn't expect a random .exe file in the startup folder. So we can safely say this file is malicious. But we're not going to delete it yet. We're going to copy it and save it in a Notepad file. I'm using Notepad because that's what's available on Windows. I would strongly suggest to use another text editor, whatever you prefer, because there are much better text editors than Notepad. Okay, I have saved this file. I can make some notes here. Many hits on Virustotal. Exit file with random name. Just those notes are for yourself. You don't have to make them. You can make them if you want to check them later to get an idea of what you're dealing with. You could also put in a link to the Virustotal results or whatever information you find. Okay, let's minimize this and let's move on to the next one. Here we have two components to check. There's the registry reference and the file itself. So let's start at the registry. I can jump to the entry by clicking Jump to Entry. That opens the key. You can see it here, the current user, branch, software, Microsoft Windows, current version, run key. And this is the value. You can see the whole name like this. And here is the path, and that is similar to the one listed here. I will make the column a bit larger to make it visible. You can see both are the same. So this is where Autoruns gets the information. It displays in this line, this part of the line. This is the image path, that's this one. And the information here, it extracts from the file it reads in the image path. So as we said, this does not look good. We would expect some humanly readable string here, not just some numbers and letters. And as said, the file path, well, you usually don't have run entries in the temp folder, run from the temp folder, because, well, the temp folder can get cleaned out, and you would expect a normal program file, program path to see here. It's still only the fact that the file is run from the temp folder alone doesn't make it malicious, but the fact that this file tries to impersonate a legitimate Windows file with legitimate Windows metadata and has a totally random value name, that altogether makes it pretty suspicious. So next, let's look at the file itself. We can do that, but jump to image. And there is our sv host.exe file in the temp folder. We can check its properties. Right-clicking on properties. And just to compare, because this is impersonating svc host.exe, let's also call up the legitimate svc host.exe properties. That file is located in the system32 folder. And there we have it, as well as its properties. I hope these are visible for everyone. The first big difference here is that the legitimate file has a digital signature, and I think it's valid, while the suspicious file has not. Let's also compare the details. Details here and details here. As you can see, the file description for the suspicious file is Windows Service with the typo. The legitimate file would be host process for Windows Service without a typo. The type application, the file version, that's not that interesting, because you will see most exe files are applications, so that's pretty normal. The product name, again, Windows Service. Well, the product name wouldn't be Windows Service. As we can see here, it's Microsoft Windows Operating System, which is to be expected for a legitimate Windows file. The product version is also not really important, although you can clearly see it's not the same. Then the copyright 2017 doesn't look that suspicious, but if you compare it with the actual copyright line from Microsoft, which says Microsoft Corporation, all rights reserved, it doesn't look very similar. Sizes aren't that important here. They have different sizes because there are different files. Then legal trademarks. This file doesn't even have a legal trademarks field. This is probably a compiler thing, or they just thought it would look good to add a legal trademark. Again, Windows Service with a typo. And the original file name, look at that, game.exe. We already saw that in Virustotal. So the original file name is not even remotely related to Microsoft, because that would be svc host.exe. Game.exe is not a legitimate Microsoft file as far as I'm aware. So even if we didn't have any Virustotal report, I could be pretty sure this file is malicious and has to go together with its reference and the other file, which is related. So we're going to close this. Just for fun, let's also check Virustotal here. And again, it has a quite generous detection rate, so that confirms what we already found. A lot of suspicious things there. Okay, let's note this down for removal as well. And we have to ensure we copy two things here. We have to remove the registry reference, and we have to remove the file. We can, let's leave this open. Okay. This part is the value name. We need that. And this part is the file name. But the value name itself is not enough, because we also need the key this value is located in. In this way, you can compare the Windows registry to the file system. In the file system, you have files and folders. A folder contains files. It may contain subfolders, which may contain files in turn. And just like that, the registry is composed of keys, and each key may have values and subkeys, which also could contain values. The value name is like the name of the file, and the value data is like the content of a file, except usually a lot simpler. Okay, so let's also copy the key name, so we know where to look for this value. There we go. We can delete this and just let's put it on one line. I put this between the two to ensure it's not a subkey, it is a value. And here I could also make some comments. I'm not going to do that because I already explained it and we're not on a typing course. So we could look further at this Unwanted report. I'm not going to do that because it would take a lot of time to examine all these entries. You see something from WinRAR, more Emsisoft entries. I see hashtag. I see some from Java, Google, a lot of Microsoft stuff, but all of this is legitimate. You could research every line just as we did before. Look at the key, Google the key if you don't know what it is for. For example, Google the term run key, run value, Google alternate shell, Google shellx context menu handlers, any of these terms, if you Google them, for example, with a plus registry, you usually will get good search results that explain what the entry is. You can compare that with the file information you're expected to find there. Check if these files are legitimate, and that will help you make a list of what is legitimate and what is not. And this will be time consuming the first few times you do it, but the more you do it, the more familiar you get with it. And after a while, it really won't take more than a few minutes to go through a log like this one. Okay, now that we have identified everything, it's time for removal, the fun part. So we have 3 objects to remove, 2 files and 1 run value. All 3 belong to the same infection. You can know that because the name of the run value and the name of this file have an identical string. It would be an extraordinary coincidence if that was not the same malware family. So let's start removing. We can try that with other ones. Let's start with this one. We can right-click and delete. And other ones will ask us if we are sure. Yes, I'm really sure. But there's a problem. I can't delete it because the process cannot access the file. It is in use by another process. So if you get this error, it usually means the malware is running and really doesn't want you to terminate it. To make sure this can be removed, we will have to have a look at Process Explorer to see if the malware is running and to see if we can stop it that way. So I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to minimize this too and this too. And I'm going to start Process Explorer. Again with administrator privileges, because why not? This is a big list of all processes running. I have changed the font size. I'm going to make this a little bigger. It shows a lot more than Windows Task Manager. You could try to use Windows Task Manager in this case as well. It wouldn't be useful because it won't show the malicious process, while Process Explorer hopefully will. So let's look if we see any of the identified malicious files. Going through the list. And look at that. I found our svhost.exe file complete with Windows serifs, names and all that. So we know this is the right process and we have to try to kill this. So let's just try kill process. Are you sure? Yes, I'm really sure. And that worked. We didn't get any alerts. Right now, it is good to monitor Process Explorer for a few more seconds to make sure the process doesn't respawn, because if it does, you will need to, for example, to reboot in safe mode and try the same thing, because in safe mode, run values and startup folder content isn't processed, so the malware won't be running unless it has other loading points, and then you may, for example, need to enter the recovery environment or use a different tool that has a bit more permissions. But in this case, that isn't necessary. It looks like the process hasn't respawned, so we should be able to kill our malware with Autoruns now. And let's try that. So the same entry again, delete. Yes, I'm sure. And it's gone now. The entire folder disappeared because it's empty and Process Explorer is set to hide empty load points. You can enable that, but it just makes the log a lot bigger. Okay, next, this one. We can do the same thing, delete. And now I want to bring up Regedit once again. We see the value here. We're selecting delete. Yes, I'm sure. And it's gone now. We can check that here as well by refreshing it. As you can see, the value is gone, but pay attention here. The file is not yet gone. We didn't do anything about the file, and we will need to do that another way. We could empty the temp folder. We could use a tool to empty the temp folder. We could use an antivirus scan at this point. It really doesn't matter because the malware is no longer running. And this file we have in the temp folder. Let's also go there. There we are. Our svhost.exe file is just any file now that can be deleted. I'm doing it with Shift Delete, Enter, and it's gone. And at this point, you have eliminated all running and visible malware. That does not mean all malware files are gone from the computer, because you may have noticed this beauty here, malwaredropper.exe. That is probably not a good file. At this point, if there is an antivirus program present on the machine, no matter what program it is a good idea to update it and run a scan to check for any leftover files on the machine and remove them. If there's no antivirus program present, you can install one at this point, because nobody and nothing will be blocking it, because the active malware is gone. Even if you have 100 files left on the machine that are malicious and were probably dropped, if they have no load point, they're not active and they can be removed by anyone. The problem is you shouldn't accidentally double click on them. So right now we can run a quick scan with the installed Emsisoft. We would expect it to detect the dropper and nothing else, because this was a simple infection. It was not very complicated. But as you can see, the same principle really would apply if you were to have many other lines that were infected. And it really at this point the machine, even if it's not clean of malware files, is clean of loaded malware, and restarting the computer will not relaunch any malware. So you want to get rid of it. As you can see, the dropper has been picked up already and the scan is almost done. It doesn't look like anything else is present, which means our mission was successful. Let's wait for it to finish. I'm checking some of the comments now. Yes, there's one question I can answer right now. There are some load points that are not detected by autoruns. The majority is, but I can't remember what it is. There are some. The 32-bit shell value isn't shown, if I'm not mistaken. That is not a big issue. The shell value is the value that is used to load the desktop. It's normally set to explorer.exe, and malware can change it. Normally, you would set it in the normal key for it, in the winlogon key. Is it located? Some malware uses that value. That it's not effective because it won't be loaded, but it is a load point that is not shown, and I believe there are a few more. I can't remember them right now. If I do, I will let you know. Okay, this was it as far as the demo concerns.
Thank you, Elise, for that great session. So let's just getting started. Do you have other questions? Please put them on the questions. And there were some questions that came in earlier, Elise. If you would like, if I could get one of them for you. What are some examples of malware that protects itself against security software?
Well, any type of malware will try to do that because malware doesn't really like security software. There's one really good example I could give here, and that's what we call the Smart Service Rootkit. Anyone who has worked past year in malware removal will know it. It is the an adware rootkit that causes any antivirus or security to load it to given resources are in use error, and you can't run anything because it blocks based on certificates of legitimate programs, and it has a lot of protection mechanisms, and once it is on the system, it's removal is very, very difficult. You usually have to use the recovery environment because it really won't let anything. Well, it will let stuff being installed, but you can't run anything. And once you try to launch a program or launch a scan, it will just give an error. And there are more, but this is really the best example of such malware. And it's a really, from a technical point of view, it's a really interesting piece of malware.
Got it. And at least while we're waiting for more questions coming in, let me actually get this for you to discuss the prevention.
Yes, because after malware removal and manual malware removal, it would be good to get back to what I said earlier. Prevention really is better than cure, because now that we clean the computer and we spend some time researching and doing all this, we really want to make sure it stays that way. And here are some tips to keep it clean. First of all, be careful what you click. Don't click on unknown links, for example, in social media. Don't open email attachments from unknown senders. You can just forward those to your antivirus, for example, to us. And always read what you agree to when you are installing a program before clicking next. And uncheck any option for third-party software or search engine changes or browser changes you don't want. Of course, use an antivirus or anti-malware program. Make sure it's up to date and its real-time protection is on, because you do need it. And very important, back up your data. I can't say it enough. We have a blog article about best backup practices, and I would encourage everyone to follow the indications there, because not all infections can be removed successfully, especially when talking about ransomware. We all know there are variants that cannot be decrypted, and a backup can save you a load of trouble and sometimes even money. And any backup is better than no backup. And finally, keep Windows and other installed software up to date. You may remember last year's WannaCry outbreak, which was impossible on systems that were up to date, but still affected a lot of computer users, which means they did not have their updates installed. And of course, there's a lot more to say on the subject. You could talk about passwords, password manager, strong passwords. But for this webinar, this was it. And I hope you enjoyed it. And we're looking forward to any questions you may have on the subject.
Okay, Lisa, there were a couple of them that came in. If you could look at the list.
Yes, I'm looking at them right now. I'm going to... where Emsisoft is New Zealand based. It's not in the US. I already addressed the load points that Autoruns doesn't list. The only one I can remember is the 32-bit shell value, but there are a few more, although not many, and Autoruns is really nice, especially because it's one of the few tools that also list Windows management instrumentation scripts that can be quite hard to detect and are especially very popular with mining malware, crypto mining malware. Reading through a few more. We will have a recording later. I don't know how much time that takes. I see here a comment about picking up all the PUBs or not picking them up. We might do a future version of a webinar about the PUB category if there's an interest in that. How effective is Virustotal and can I rely on it? That's a really interesting question. Virustotal is an amazing resource in the first place because it uses so many engines and there is power in numbers. Virustotal is not 100% reliable. It just takes the scan results from all tools it uses and it displays those. That means there may always be false positive results. So, for example, if you scan a file and you see 1 or 2 detections and it's a file that is not new, so it's more than a week old, I would take as a rule of thumb a few days a week. It's scanned today, it's more than a week old, and 2 or 3 engines detected, then you can safely say that file is most likely a false positive and it's not malicious. However, if you see a file that has 30, 40, 50 detections, and all of them have some sort of malware, word, Trojan, malware, backdoor, all that kind of terms in the name, then you can be pretty sure it is malicious. You can also see files that have 30, 40, 50 detections and that have a lot of application, riskware, adware names in the title, in the detection name, then it's likely you're dealing with PUBs and not with malware. But again, it's difficult to say, and especially detection names are really fuzzy, and you can't really rely on detection names, except when dealing with file infectors. For example, if you're dealing with Sality or Virus, you will see those in almost all detection results, detection names. And then there is a group of packers that can generate quite a few detections, but usually you will see some form of the packer name in the detection name, and you may see 20 detections for a packer, but if you only see packer VM protect and you check the metadata of the file, because Virustotal will show you that as well on the details tab, I think. That can help you determine if the file is legitimate or not, because often you will see some comments for such files, for example, saying, hey, it's only packed, it's not malicious. So it is reliable, but you have to you have to learn how to interpret the results. And yeah, the only thing I can really say for that is use it a lot so you get experience. And I'm glad you all liked it. I'm just reading through the comments to see what other questions. Fileless malware is shown perfectly well in autoruns. The question is, if you think there is a malware and the autoruns doesn't show its start point, what other programs would you try? Same for PE. What do you mean with PE in this case? What about fileless malware? How do you detect injected legit files? There are a few questions. Let's take them from the first. Autoruns doesn't show its starting point. At that point, you need you suspect there's malware and it's not shown. You will need to investigate the symptoms. You see, for example, if the symptoms are related to the browser, you will dig into the browser settings. If the symptoms are system-wide, for example, extreme slowness, you can, for example, resort to an anti-rootkit tool. There are a few of them. Anti-rootkit tools are notoriously unstable because they check the kernel of the system, and you don't need them that often, but there are cases you might. Fileless malware is shown perfectly well in autoruns because autoruns doesn't only show the files, it shows also registry information. And if you have files malware that resides, for example, in the run value, autoruns will show it you just fine. It just won't list any file, or it will only list the script host that's used, depending on the fileless malware. But it will show you, it might not show all of it. For example, many fileless malware families have a run value that points to another key where the actual payload is saved in the registry. So that information will be present in the run value data, and you can examine that data and get the actual key this data is located in from the autoruns report. And we might also, again, if there's enough interest in this, we might do a future article or webinar about this, just to show how you would do this. It's a bit more complex, but not that much more, as long as the data is not too obfuscated. Are there any? No, I'm missing one. How do you detect injected legitimate files? File injection is always done in a process, not in the file on disk. So the loaded file is injected. That means there's nothing to clean. There's just a process to close. For example, if this malware would have injected code into a legitimate process, well, if the machine has an antivirus running, for example, Emsisoft would have detected that without a problem and would have alerted you, hey, something's injecting a legitimate file and you should probably block that. If it happens in a case like this and we restart the computer or we kill the process, because that's typically good habit, then the problem is already solved because no modifications on disk have been made. The next question is about unwanted tabs in browsers opening. We are working on an article and webinar featuring pub removal, and that will focus on browser problems. But already, if this happens if this happens in a browser, the first thing to look at, does it happen in one browser or in all browsers? If it only happens in one browser, you will need to examine the settings and extensions that are installed for that particular browser and remove any unwanted extensions and turn off settings, for example, search settings that you don't want. But we will go into this problem more in detail in a future webinar. Is there a way to isolate the infected machine in the local network but still keep the option to access Virustotal to validate the suspicious file? There are ways to do that, but they are not that easy. There are, however, simple ways to avoid this problem. You could copy the file hash if you can find it, or if you have a tool to calculate the file hash. For example, you may have seen I have HashTab installed on the virtual machine. HashTab is a small tool that allows you to calculate. It calculates a few hashes of the file and it displays them, so you can copy them and look them up on Virustotal. You could copy the file you want to upload and zip it, password protect the zip file, and transfer it using a USB device to another computer, because today's malware does not focus that much on USB devices, and if your other computer is properly protected by an antivirus program, that can be safely done. You also could just shut down the internet and only quickly connect to upload a file to Virustotal, check if it's good, and then for the removal process, just shut down your internet connection again. You could go as far as just unplugging the Ethernet cable, or just unplugging or powering down your router. Are there any advantages to running Emsisoft in safe mode? If normal mode is working, no, there are not. If normal mode for some reason is really slow or really giving you trouble, or you have 100 pop-ups, then you can run Emsisoft in safe mode. The whole problem is that in safe mode you have a lower resolution, and depending on your device, for example, if you're running it on a laptop, you may have trouble getting the entire application on screen because of the low resolution in safe mode, and it can be a bit annoying to work with that. You won't have that problem on a normal PC with a normal screen, but on a laptop it definitely might be a problem. Please do more webinars like this. Thank you. We will try to do that. Oh, and I forgot one here. The cleanup of the registry is a concern to me. Can one simply use a product like CCleaner for the registry after the file has been removed? And I have to say, no, please don't do that. I have nothing against using CCleaner or similar products, but a registry cleaner like a junk file cleaner is not necessary. If you really like using it, please do so. Just be careful what product you use, realize that cleaning the registry can cause serious problems if it's not done properly, because not all registry junk that's detected by a tool is necessarily junk and has to go. Also realize that cleaning the registry does not do much to change performance on your system. It's not like cleaning out 30 gigabytes of useless data from your hard disk, which frees up a lot of space that you can use for other things, or that can speed up your computer a bit. No, cleaning the registry really won't do much.
Elise, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we only have time for one more question.
Okay, I will. Yes. I will finish this one and do one more. We're almost done with the questions anyway.
Okay.
So it's not safe because it's sort of roulette. Maybe it detects. Maybe it will remove the reference. Maybe it won't. In this case, leaving the run value won't do any harm if it's orphaned, so the file is no longer there. Windows will try to start it. It won't be able to because the file's not there. In the worst case, you may get a notification box with an error. We couldn't find the file or load it. And that's it. It won't leave malicious activity on the system, but try to work clean and just remove it yourself, because it's 2 clicks with auto runs. Yes, it is recorded. There's one more question about injection. That's please, if you want an answer, please submit it via the support email address. It's no longer on screen. It's support support at emsisoft.com. Just there it is. Just mention it for the webinar, and I will reply to it once I get to it. The last question. Authoron shows almost all load points. What about Process Explorer? Does it also show almost all loaded processes, or does it have weaknesses processes it doesn't show? Well, any tool has weaknesses, and it just depends on the malware you're dealing with to see which weakness bothers you at that point or not. There's no tool that has no weaknesses, and Process Explorer is a great tool. It does show. It will show most malicious processes, but there are certainly exceptions. For example, if you have device drivers running that load very early in the boot process, it is possible they mask other processes used by the malware or mask themselves. And so it depends. It depends on what you're dealing with, but in most cases, it is a really useful tool, Process Explorer. There are other good tools you could use, Process Hacker, for example. It really depends also on your preference. If you Google Process Explorer or Task Manager replacements, you will find quite a few options, and I would encourage you to actually try a few if you're interested. You can try them on a virtual machine or for real, because as long as you just look and don't kill important processes, it's safe to do so. Okay, that was the last question. If you have any more questions, or if I overlooked your question, please send them in via email, and we will answer them as soon as possible.
That is right. Oh, sorry, Elise. But yeah, so thank you for joining us today, everybody. We'll be posting a recording of the webinar on YouTube, and we'll notify you via the newsletter. Again, like what Elise said, sorry for interrupting you.
It's no problem.
If yours is one of the questions you weren't able to get to due to the time constraint, please send us an email at support@emsisoft.com. And if you'd like to learn more about our security products, please go to our website at emsisoft.com for your free trial. And again, thank you, everyone, and have a great day. We hope to see you again in the next installment of the series.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.